1970, a country music artist by the name of Glenn Campbell recorded a brand new album. It was his 14th studio album, and the title track of that studio album was one of his favorite songs. The title of that song and the title of the album was Try a Little Kindness. Some of you older folk in the audience might be able to remember back to 1970, and you might remember, some of you older folk might remember listening to that on the radio back in that far-off day. Part of the lyrics to that song read this way: aren't you glad I'm not singing? You've got to try a little kindness. Yes, show a little kindness. Yes, shine your light for everyone to see. And if you'll try a little kindness, and you'll overlook the blindness of the narrow-minded people on the narrow-minded streets. For some inexplicable reason, I was thinking about that song the other day. Why, I have no idea. And then, thinking about that song, my mind began to wonder. I know that shocks you that my mind would wander, but it did. And as my mind was wandering about kindness, I thought about a story I heard some time back, a story I read, a story that reminds us of how often we fail to realize the importance of just the little things in life. It seems that this elderly woman always went to a branch post office that was in her town. And her reason for going to this, it was a large city, had numerous branch post offices, but her reason for going to this particular branch post office was that the employees there were always so friendly. Well, one year she went to this post office, this branch post office, just before Christmas, and she wanted to buy some stamps. And the line was long, and people were mailing their Christmas presents, and they were picking up their presents, and there was just a lot of activity going on. And someone standing behind her in line pointed out to her, and they said kindly, they said, "Ma'am, if all you need are stamps, there's a stamp machine in the lobby, and you don't need to wait in this long line." She said, "I know, but the stamp machine won't ask me about my arthritis." You know, sometimes people we meet along the pathway of life just need a kind word or a kind act. Good luck with that in this world we live in today. Look around you and tell me what you see in this world we live in. Partisan politics to the point of hatred. War, anxiety, broken marriages, ruined relationships, and venom-filled airways if you turn on the newscast today. In this world you and I are living in today, we are in desperate need of kindness. When Paul wrote that beautiful 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, he talked about love. And one of the attributes he tells us about love there is love suffers long. What else, Paul? And is kind. In the 5th chapter of Galatians, in that letter to the churches of Galatia, Paul tells us about the fruit of the Spirit. And he tells us in the 5th chapter that the fruit of the Spirit is love. And then as he elaborates on the qualities of the fruit of the Spirit, one of those attributes of the fruit of the Spirit is kindness. When he wrote to the church at Ephesus in chapter 4, verse 32, he said, "Be you kind one to another, tender-hearted," he said, "forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you." He told them to be kind to each other, to be tender-hearted to each other, and to forgive each other just like God forgave all of them. Kindness is an attribute of love. But kindness is more than just an attribute of love. Kindness also makes us, me and you, more like God. And if you and I really want to be like God, then we are going to develop a heart of kindness. And you think about kindness, and kindness seems like something that's pretty ordinary, doesn't it? But when you really think about it on a deep level, kindness is actually remarkable, and at the same time it's inspiring. Exhibiting kindness, my friends, can literally change the lives of people around us. And to be sure, kindness might be one of the most underrated attributes that you and I can have in our lives. How many times in life have you felt discouraged? Like the walls were closing in around you, the ceiling was falling down on you, and the floor was about to come out from under you. And you feel like everything's against you, and you're met by someone who's willing to show just a little kindness toward you. I often wonder how many lives have been changed because someone showed kindness. It has been said, and rightly so, more people have been brought into the church by the kindness of real Christian love than by all the theological arguments in the world. Did you hear what I said? More people have been brought into the church by the kindness of real Christian love than all the theological arguments in the world. Kindness encompasses being gentle, tender-hearted, and merciful. And if we want to be like Jesus, if we want other people to see Jesus living in us, we've got to learn how to be kind. Hard-hearted, unkind, judgmental Christians can do a great deal of damage. I remember a man in a certain congregation some years ago. This man prided himself on being plain spoken. He was a man that was always willing to give someone a piece of his mind. Problem was, he didn't have any mind to spare to be giving people a piece of it. But there was a young man in this congregation who had, in the course of time, married this young lady. She was not a member of the church. And as time went on, they had some children. And this young man, who had once been very faithful to the church, started to miss services occasionally. And one Sunday, he and his wife and the children were in worship service. And this plain-spoken man, ready to give people a piece of his mind, looked at her and he said, "Well, you know, old so-and-so used to be a pretty good boy till he married you. Now he hardly ever comes to church." decided he needed to give somebody a piece of his mind. Hard-hearted, unkind, judgmental Christians. Sometimes we're too quick to speak. Sometimes we're too quick to judge, criticize. And we're short on tears, and we're short on sympathy, and we're short on patience. And sometimes we view people that are tender-hearted as emotional weaklings. And deep down inside, we know that's not right. There are times we're too cold. There are times we're too callous. There are times we really don't even like ourselves. On the other side of the coin, there are those who sometimes weep easily and they weep copiously. Because oftentimes those who weep copiously and easily, their tears are without any meaning or value. There's no driving power in those tears. They only bring an added weakness. I've even known folks who felt that they were very pious and very gentle because of their capacity for weeping. How often do we look at others, those we come in contact with? How often do we look at others as a custom-designed creation of Almighty God? How often do we look at others as someone who has God's image stamped on them? How often do we look at others as the object of God's greatest affection? How often do we look at others we come in contact with as someone Jesus shed his blood for? Do we look at them that way? Being kind is to feel toward our friends and our enemies as Jesus felt toward his. Being kind is to have Jesus' attitude toward the sinful and the suffering. It is to feel as Jesus felt toward those who were outcasts. It was to feel as Jesus felt toward those who had gone hopelessly wrong. Kindness will show in our judgments of others. We're going to search for the best that there is in others instead of searching for the worst in others. Kindness will cause us to seek extenuating circumstances rather than things that incriminate and prove guilt. Kindness will cause us to be slow to condemn and quick to commend. And we're going to do that not simply out of a sense of duty. Kindness is not merely our duty. Kindness is the spontaneous expression of a loving heart. If we are kind, we'll think and we'll say the best possible of our erring brother or sister. When we're kind, we're going to give and we're going to serve. You remember a story Jesus told in Luke chapter 10? It was a story about a man who was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho, a road that was known as the Bloody Way. Because the caves and the rocks and the hills along that road from Jerusalem to Jericho were filled with thieves and robbers. There was a man traveling this road that fell among some of those thieves and robbers. They beat him, they stripped him of his clothes, they took everything he had, and they left him for dead. By and by, a priest came along. He saw this man, and he passed him by on the other side. And a Levite came along, and he passed him by on the other side. And then there was a Samaritan, a man that was a part of a hated, despised race of people came along. He saw this man beaten and bloody, with a few rags of clothes left on him. He put him on his own beast. He gave him first aid. He took him to the local inn. And he said to the innkeeper, he gave the innkeeper money, said, take care of him. If it costs more than I'm leaving you, I'll pay more when I come back. The world has remembered that nameless Samaritan through all the centuries since. And that nameless Samaritan will be known and remembered until the end of time. And he's not going to be remembered because he was rich. And he's not going to be remembered because he was a genius or a great physician. He's going to be remembered for one thing. He's going to be remembered because of his kindness. He's going to be remembered because he showed compassion and mercy. He's going to be remembered because he could not withhold his service and assistance from someone who was in need. On the other hand, the priest and the Levite, they share with each other the immortality of shame. And it wasn't because they assisted in the robbery. They didn't steal the few shreds of clothing the robbers might have left to that poor man. They didn't kick him or inflict any other wounds in addition to those that this half-dead man was already suffering from. All they did was pass by without doing anything. And doing so, they showed themselves to be void of kindness. If the local constabulary had come out to arrest those responsible for the crime, the priest and Levite would have not been worried, because the local constabulary would have confined their search to the highwaymen and the robbers that lived in the hills and the caves along the road. This complacent priest and self-satisfied Levite would have been left alone. They wouldn't have been disturbed. But if you read the story in Luke chapter 10, you know what Jesus did? Jesus put them in the same category as the robbers. They were alike in the fact they were lacking in kindness. And along with a lack of kindness was a lack of mercy. People that are kind don't confine their ministry to the giving of material substance. Now, there are times when our fellow man needs that. There are times that our fellow man needs it desperately. And when the need is there, it is our duty to provide it. But while there are those in need of physical bread, there are far more people who are in need of the bread of life. And those who are kind are also forgiving. Those who are kind refuse to nurse a grudge. Those who are possessed of kindness consider hate in their heart to be something deadly and something that's damning. Those who are kind love their enemies. They bless those that curse them. They pray for those that despitefully use them and persecute them. And doing that, they show themselves to be big with something of the bigness of Jesus. You know, we forget it sometimes. But you know what we need to remember? Paul told the brethren in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1? He said, brethren, if a brother be overtaken in a fault, you which are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness. Are you listening? Considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. If we seriously consider ourselves, we are often likely to realize the faults that we most sharply condemn in others are those that we are also guilty of. Because if we are acquainted with our own sinful hearts in any way, we can't help but realize that it's only because of God's mercy and God's love and God's kindness that we're any better off than the chief of sinners. And since I have, since all of us have so much to be forgiven of, we need to be ready to forgive also. And then sometimes we need to consider maybe just how imperfectly we might know those we condemn. Because if we knew everything, it might be easier to forgive. In the deepest sense of its meaning, we cannot be kind without the help of Jesus. When we come to know Jesus Christ, and when we come to know His nature, and when Jesus walks with us, then we will share His kindness and His willingness to forgive. Beloved, true kindness is a gift. And apart from Jesus Christ, we can never attain true kindness. But Jesus makes it possible for even the most callous, self-centered person on the top side of God's green earth to be kind. We need to be aware of what kindness can do for others. Exhibiting kindness towards someone we come in contact with can have dramatic effects on their lives. Sometimes we want to do things for people who can repay us in kind. You know, we're nice to the boss so we can maybe get a promotion. Or when the neighbor's kid that's in the band is selling candy bars, we buy a candy bar so that when it comes time to sell popcorn for the athletic booster club, they'll buy some popcorn from us. Or we'll babysit with someone so that they'll have to babysit for us, maybe obligated to. Here's what Jesus said. This is in Luke chapter 14, verse 14. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and thou shalt be blessed. For thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. That's in the formal, stilted language of the King James. Here's the way Phillips' translation puts it. Then, addressing his host, Jesus said, when you give a luncheon or a dinner party, don't invite your friends or your brothers or relations or wealthy neighbors, for the chances are that they will invite you back and you'll be fully repaid. No. When you give a party, invite the poor, the lame, the crippled, and the blind. That way lies real happiness for you. They have no means of repaying you, but you'll be repaid when good men are rewarded at the resurrection. I don't know about you, but that sounds like pretty good payday to me. Sometimes, indeed, we need to be just a little bit willing to be inconvenienced. Remember that story we talked about the Good Samaritan? You know, there are times we don't want to show any kindness because we really just don't want to go to the trouble to do it. That Samaritan went out of his way to help someone that was in need. Sometimes we have to allow ourselves to be inconvenienced the story in 2 Samuel of David and Mephibosheth? You remember David and Saul's son Jonathan were the best of friends. And when Saul was jealous and Saul was trying to kill David, Jonathan, Saul's son, protected David and showed him kindness, even though Jonathan knew it meant he would never sit on the throne. Saul and Jonathan, if you'll recall, were killed in battle. And David became king. And after he became king, David was looking for anyone who was still alive in Saul or Jonathan's family. Now this was a common practice of the Oriental kings, because if someone from the previous dynasty was still alive, they wanted to usually go ahead and kill him so they wouldn't be in fear of them trying to take back the throne. But David said, is there anyone of the house of Jonathan still alive that I may show kindness to them? David gave Mephibosheth a seat at the king's table because he was Jonathan's son. If you'll remember, Mephibosheth had been crippled because of an accidental fall. His nurse had dropped him. He was escaping after Jonathan and Saul were killed. David gave him a seat at the king's table. He took care of him because he remembered the kindness Jonathan, his father, had showed toward him. Write this down. It's on the final exam. Kindness and gentleness can change lives. You never know when your kindness could change the life of another person. God wants his people to be kind. When we allow the Spirit to grow in our lives, then we will be able to be kind to those around us. What is the need of your life this morning? Are you living like Jesus? Are you showing the kindness of Jesus Christ to those you come in contact with? Is Jesus the Lord and Master of your life? You may have heard this before, but I'm going to say it just in case you've never heard it. If Jesus Christ is not Lord and Master of all of your life, he is not Lord and Master at all in your life. Have you ever made him Lord of your life? So easy to do it, to come in simple trust and faith, repenting of everything that's sin in your life, confessing his name, and being buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of past sin. And that makes Jesus the Lord of your life. And then you live for him. And maybe you've done that in the past, but you haven't lived like Jesus wants you to live. You need to come back home. Let brothers and sisters pray with you, pray for you. What needs to be done in your life for you to develop the heart of Jesus? Is there some need we can pray for you? This is your opportunity to come. Let us help you make Jesus Lord of your life.